In the basement archives of what used to be a Soviet Materials Research Institute outside Leningrad, there's a series of reports filed between 1974 and 1982 concerning a device called the Splinter. The official designation was Vibration Sensor 7. It was designed to detect microscopic stress fractures in concrete structures by measuring vibrations too small for conventional instruments. The device worked perfectly. Too perfectly. It detected vibrations that shouldn't exist. Vibrations that moved through concrete in patterns that suggested purpose. The official explanation is equipment malfunction, but the reports inside describe 8 years of trying to understand what the Splinter was actually detecting before the project was quietly terminated and every device destroyed. The Splinter project began in March 1974 at the Institute of Structural Materials in Leningrad. The Soviet Union was experiencing problems with rapid concrete deterioration in major construction projects, particularly in the newer residential blocks built during the expansion programs of the late 1960s. Buildings were developing cracks years ahead of schedule. The Ministry of Construction wanted early detection systems to identify structural weaknesses before they became catastrophic failures. Dr. Anatoly Petrov, a physicist specializing in materials science, was assigned to lead the development team. The device they created was elegant in its simplicity. The Splinter consisted of a series of piezoelectric sensors that could be embedded in concrete during construction or retrofitted into existing structures. These sensors detected vibrations at frequencies far below what human perception could register, translating them into visual waveforms on an oscilloscope. In laboratory testing, the device performed exactly as designed. A technical report from June 1974 states, "Sensor array successfully detects structural microfractures at formation stage, providing early warning capability for preventive maintenance. Sensitivity exceeds design specifications by factor of 3. Recommend immediate field deployment." The first field installation occurred in July 1974 at a residential complex in the Moskovsky district of Leningrad. The building was 5 years old and already showing signs of structural stress. Splinters were installed throughout the basement level, and monitoring equipment was set up in a ground floor utility room. The initial readings were unremarkable. Normal settling vibrations, minor stress patterns. Exactly what the engineers expected to see. Then, on July 23rd at 3:17 in the morning, the monitoring equipment registered something unusual. The technician on duty that night was a young engineer named Viktor Sokolov. His incident report, filed the following morning, describes what he observed with careful precision.
At 3:17, all sensors registered simultaneous vibration event. Pattern was unlike any structural movement in reference database. Frequency was consistent at 0.7 Hz. Amplitude minimal but detectable. Duration was exactly 43 seconds. Event terminated simultaneously across all sensors. No corresponding seismic activity recorded by city monitoring stations. No construction or traffic activity at that hour to explain vibration source. Event appears to originate from within the concrete structure itself.
Dr. Petrov reviewed the data personally and found it perplexing but not immediately alarming. Concrete is a complex material, and vibrations can propagate through it in unexpected ways.
The observed pattern may indicate previously undocumented resonance behavior in aging concrete. Recommend continued monitoring to determine if this represents isolated anomaly or recurring phenomenon.
The phenomenon recurred. Every night for the next week, at 3:17 precisely, the same vibration pattern appeared. Exactly 43 seconds, exactly 0.7 hertz, originating simultaneously from every sensor location. By early August, Dr. Petrov had expanded the monitoring to include additional instrumentation, accelerometers, temperature sensors, humidity monitors, anything that might correlate with the mysterious vibrations. A research assistant named Irina Volkova was assigned to analyze the accumulated data. Her report, dated August 12, 1974, identified something that would define the direction of the entire project.
Analysis of vibration patterns reveals non-random structure. The 0.7 Hz signal exhibits modulation. Amplitude varies in regular cycles of approximately 2.3 seconds.
This modulation pattern repeats consistently across all observation periods. Natural resonance does not produce such organized variation. Pattern suggests external forcing mechanism or internal process with characteristic periodicity. The project's scope changed at that point. This was no longer just about detecting cracks in concrete. This was about understanding what was causing organized vibrations in a material that should only vibrate in response to external forces. Dr. Petrov requested additional Splinter installations in other buildings to determine if the phenomenon was specific to the Moskovsky district complex or more widespread. By October 1974, Splinters had been installed in 12 locations across Leningrad, ranging from new construction to buildings dating back to the 1950s. The results were documented in a comprehensive report submitted to the Academy of Sciences in November 1974. Every building showed the same pattern. Vibrations at 3:17, duration of 43 seconds, frequency of 0.7 Hz with 2.3 second modulation cycles. The phenomenon appeared to be present in all concrete structures monitored, regardless of age, construction method, or location. Dr. Petrov's conclusion was measured but concerning. The observed vibrations are not structural in origin. They appear to be intrinsic to the concrete itself, or to something within the concrete that we have not previously detected. The pattern's consistency across diverse structures suggests a common source or mechanism. Further investigation required to determine nature and implications of phenomenon. The Academy's response was to classify the report and assign a KGB liaison to the project. The liaison, a man named Colonel Dmitry Lebedev, arrived in December 1974. His presence indicated that someone in the security apparatus thought the vibrations might have strategic implications. Perhaps they indicated a new form of structural monitoring by Western intelligence. Perhaps they suggested a flaw in Soviet construction materials that could be exploited. Or perhaps they were something else entirely that security services preferred to control. Under Colonel Lebedev's supervision, the project took on a different character. The research became more systematic and more secretive. Additional splinters were deployed in military installations, government buildings, and strategic infrastructure. The data accumulated rapidly. By March 1975, more than 60 installations were providing continuous monitoring data, and the pattern held across every single one. The vibrations were universal in concrete structures. They were invariant in timing and characteristics, and they were clearly not random. Something was happening inside the concrete. Something organized. something that repeated with mechanical precision every night at exactly the same time. And no one knew what it was. A breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Dr. Yevgeny Orlov, a mathematician brought in to analyze the modulation patterns, discovered something in the data that had been overlooked. His report, dated April 18, 1975, describes it with barely suppressed excitement.
The amplitude modulation pattern is not arbitrary. When analyzed over multiple observation cycles, the modulation exhibits higher order structure. The 2.3 second cycles themselves vary in a pattern that repeats every 17 cycles. This meta-pattern suggests information encoding. The vibrations may be carrying structured data through the concrete matrix.
The implications were staggering. If Orlov was correct, then something was using the concrete in Soviet buildings as a transmission medium. The question was, transmitting what and to whom? Dr. Petrov assembled a specialized team to attempt decoding the signal. Linguists, cryptographers, information theorists, anyone who might recognize a pattern if one existed. They worked for 3 months analyzing the vibration data, treating it as if it were an encoded message. In July 1975, they produced a preliminary finding. The team lead, a cryptographer named Marina Sokolova, wrote in her assessment,
"We have identified repeating sequences in the modulation pattern that exhibit characteristics consistent with structured communication. However, the structure does not match any known encoding system, natural language, or artificial protocol. If this is communication, it is not using any framework we recognize. The complexity suggests deliberate construction, but the purpose and content remain completely opaque to analysis."
She added in a handwritten note at the bottom,
"It feels like we're hearing one side of a conversation, but we don't know what language is being spoken or who's listening."
Colonel Lebedev ordered an escalation of the investigation. If the concrete was carrying signals, perhaps it was also receiving them. New equipment was designed to not just monitor the vibrations, but to analyze their directionality and source. This work was led by Dr. Andrei Volkov, a physicist specializing in wave propagation. His team spent 6 months developing 3-dimensional mapping techniques to trace the vibrations through the concrete structure. The results, documented in a classified report from February 1976, were deeply unsettling. Dr. Volkov wrote,
"The vibrations do not propagate from a single source point. They appear to originate simultaneously throughout the entire concrete mass. This is physically inconsistent with conventional wave mechanics. Additionally, when we attempted to trace the signal backward to identify any external source, we found that the vibrations appear to emerge from within the concrete itself, not from one location, but from the material as a whole, as if the concrete structure is generating the signal internally."
Someone had scrawled in the margin of the report, "How can a building talk to itself?" It was a flippant comment, but it captured something essential about the mystery. The concrete wasn't transmitting signals that originated elsewhere. It was generating them, or something inside the concrete was generating them. But concrete is an inert material composed of cement, aggregate, and water. There's nothing in its composition that should produce organized vibrations. Unless the composition included something that wasn't on the specifications. This possibility led to a new phase of investigation. Core samples were extracted from buildings showing the vibration phenomenon and subjected to exhaustive analysis. Chemical composition, crystalline structure, isotopic ratios. Every test available to 1970s materials science. A research chemist named Dr. Tatiana Petrova supervised this work. Her report from May 1976 contains findings that raised more questions than answers.
Analysis of concrete samples reveals no anomalous chemical composition. All components match standard construction specifications. However, electron microscopy reveals unusual microstructures in the cement matrix. Filamentary formations approximately 0.1 micrometers in diameter, arranged in networks throughout the hardened cement. These structures were not present in control samples of fresh concrete. They appear to form during the curing process.
The filaments were organic in composition, not bacterial or fungal, but something that shared characteristics with both. Dr. Petrova continued with her analysis, documenting the remarkable uniformity of these mysterious structures. The filamentary networks exhibit remarkable uniformity across samples from different buildings and different construction periods. They appeared to be the same organism or structure in every case. Growth pattern suggests these structures form in response to some stimulus present during concrete curing. Once formed, they remain stable indefinitely within the concrete matrix. She concluded with a statement that would prove prophetic. We may have discovered an unintended consequence of modern construction. Concrete provides an ideal environment for these structures to form and persist. Every concrete building in the Soviet Union may contain these networks. The question is, what are they doing? The vibrations, it seemed, were coming from the filamentary networks. But how? And why in such organized patterns? Dr. Petrov proposed a hypothesis in a theoretical paper submitted in August 1976. The filamentary structures may be responding to environmental stimuli we have not identified. The 317 timing suggests correlation with some daily cycle, possibly related to electromagnetic field variations or other periodic phenomena. The structures may be piezoelectric or otherwise mechanically responsive. When they respond, they generate microvibrations that propagate through the concrete matrix. The modulation pattern may represent some form of collective behavior among the distributed network elements. To test this hypothesis, the team designed an experiment. They would attempt to influence the vibrations by altering environmental conditions in a controlled building. Temperature, humidity, electromagnetic fields, light, anything that might affect the filamentary networks. The test site was a recently constructed laboratory building where splinters had been installed during construction. For 3 months, they systematically varied every parameter they could control while monitoring the vibration patterns. The results were documented in November 1976 by Dr. Volkov, who led the experimental work. Environmental manipulation produced no significant variation in vibration pattern. Temperature changes, humidity variations, electromagnetic field exposure. None affected the 317 phenomenon. However, they observed something unexpected. On October 23rd, during a planned power outage that darkened the building completely, the vibration pattern changed. For the first time since monitoring began, the modulation cycle accelerated. Instead of 2.3 second cycles, they observed 1.8 second cycles. The change persisted for the duration of the darkness. When power was restored, the pattern returned to baseline within approximately 30 seconds. This suggested that the filamentary networks were sensitive to light, or perhaps to the absence of light. It suggested they were aware of their environment in some manner. A follow-up experiment was conducted in December 1976, this time with more careful control. The building was darkened completely for 72 consecutive hours, while vibration patterns were continuously monitored. Dr. Volkov's report describes what happened.
Progressive change in vibration pattern observed over extended darkness period. Modulation cycle continued to accelerate, reaching minimum period of 0.9 seconds after 60 hours of darkness. Additionally, the 3:17 timing shifted. By hour 70, the vibration event was occurring at 2:43. The phenomenon appeared to be drifting earlier in response to sustained darkness.
When the lights were restored, the pattern didn't immediately return to normal. It took 3 days for the vibrations to stabilize back to their baseline characteristics. During those 3 days, the monitoring equipment recorded something unprecedented. Dr. Volkov wrote,
During the restabilization period, we detected secondary vibration patterns that had not been present previously. Brief bursts of higher frequency activity at irregular intervals. These bursts lasted only 2 to 3 seconds each, but showed complex internal structure. Analysis suggests they may represent transient responses to the environmental change, or perhaps communication between network elements during adaptation process.
By early 1977, the project had been running for nearly 3 years. The accumulated data was extensive, but understanding remained limited. The filamentary networks existed. They generated vibrations. They responded to environmental conditions. But their purpose, if they had one, remained completely unknown. Dr. Petrov submitted a comprehensive status report to the Academy of Sciences in March 1977. His conclusion was honest about the gaps in knowledge.
We have documented a phenomenon present in concrete structures throughout the Soviet Union and presumably throughout the world, wherever modern concrete construction exists. The phenomenon involves biological or quasi-biological structures that form during concrete curing and persist indefinitely. These structures generate organized vibrations that exhibit characteristics of information transmission. However, we cannot determine what information is being transmitted, to what purpose, or to what recipient.
He added a personal note that was later redacted from official copies, but survived in draft form.
I am increasingly convinced that we are observing something that was not designed by any human agency. The filamentary networks appear too widespread, too uniform, and too functionally sophisticated to be accidental byproducts of construction. They seem to have purpose, but that purpose is not oriented toward anything we recognize or understand.
The project's direction shifted again in 1978, when a junior researcher named Alexei Morozov made an observation that had been overlooked in the mass of accumulated data. He noticed that the vibration patterns varied slightly between buildings of different sizes. Larger buildings showed marginally longer modulation cycles. Smaller buildings showed shorter cycles. The variation was subtle, but it was consistent. His analysis, submitted in May 1978, proposed an explanation.
The modulation pattern may be related to the total mass of concrete in the structure, as if the filamentary network is measuring or responding to the size of its environment. This suggests the networks in different buildings may be in communication with each other, comparing data about their respective structures.
This led to a new experimental approach. 2 buildings of similar size were selected, both with Splinter monitoring installations. In June 1978, one building was subjected to structural modification. A significant section of one wall was removed during renovation work. The monitoring data showed an immediate response. Dr. Petrov's report from July 1978 describes it. Within 12 hours of structural modification, vibration pattern in modified building began diverging from pattern in unmodified control building. Modulation cycle shortened by approximately 8%. More significantly, the 0317 timing drifted to 0309. The network appears to have detected the mass reduction and adjusted its behavior accordingly. This confirms that the filamentary structures are somehow sensing and responding to their concrete environment. But then, something unexpected happened. 2 weeks after the modification, the control building's vibration pattern also changed. It began exhibiting modulation characteristics similar to the modified building, despite having undergone no structural changes itself. Dr. Petrov wrote in a supplementary report, "The control building's network appears to have adopted behavioral changes from the modified building's network, despite no physical connection between the structures. The buildings are 1.7 kilometers apart. This suggests communication between networks across distances, using mechanisms we have not identified. The concrete structures may be exchanging information through means that our current monitoring cannot detect." By 1979, the project had accumulated enough concerning data that Colonel Lebedev recommended it be elevated to higher classification levels. The research was producing results that implied capabilities and phenomena beyond the scope of materials science. The filamentary networks were distributed across Soviet infrastructure. They were communicating internally and possibly externally. They were responsive to environmental changes, and they appeared to be getting more active over time. A comparative analysis of vibration patterns from 1974 versus 1979 showed measurable changes. The baseline frequency had shifted from 0.7 Hz to 0.68 Hz. The modulation cycles had become more complex, exhibiting secondary variations that hadn't been present in earlier data. Dr. Petrov noted in a report from August 1979, "The networks appear to be evolving or learning. The vibration patterns are becoming more sophisticated. Whether this represents natural development, adaptation to monitoring, or response to some external factor remains unknown. But the progression suggests the networks are not static. They are developing towards some state or purpose we have not yet identified." In 1980, the decision was made to attempt direct intervention. If the networks were responsive to environmental changes, perhaps they would respond to direct mechanical disruption. A test building was selected, and a section of concrete containing dense filamentary networks was subjected to controlled demolition. The splinters in the remaining structure recorded the response. Dr. Volkov's report from the experiment is brief but striking. Upon destruction of concrete section containing network elements, remaining network exhibited immediate response. Vibration pattern became chaotic for approximately 17 minutes. Multiple frequencies simultaneously active. Amplitude variations extreme. Then pattern stabilized into new configuration unlike baseline pattern. The 0317 timing shifted to 0452. Modulation cycles became irregular. Response suggests network experienced trauma and reorganized to compensate for lost elements. More disturbing was what happened over the following weeks. Buildings within 2 kilometers of the test site also showed altered vibration patterns. The changes were less severe than in the directly affected building, but they were unmistakable. The networks were responding to damage inflicted on a distant network element. Dr. Petrov wrote,
We appear to have demonstrated that the filamentary networks constitute a distributed system with communication capabilities we do not understand. Damage to one component affects the larger system. This has significant implications for infrastructure security and raises questions about the unintended consequences of concrete construction on massive scales.
In 1981, the project received new directives from higher authority. All research was to be consolidated. No new installations were to be created. Existing splinters were to continue monitoring, but active experimentation was suspended. The official explanation was budgetary, but the researchers understood the real reason. Someone had decided that the filamentary networks were either too sensitive for continued investigation or too potentially dangerous. Dr. Petrov's final report, submitted in December 1981, summarized 8 years of work with careful neutrality. The Splinter project has successfully identified and characterized a previously unknown phenomenon present in concrete structures. The phenomenon involves biological structures that generate organized vibrations, exhibiting characteristics of information processing and transmission. Further research would require the resources and authorization beyond current project scope. Recommend continued passive monitoring to track long-term developments. The project was formally terminated in March 1982. All Splinter devices were ordered removed and destroyed. The demolition records indicate that 127 devices were recovered and eliminated. The monitoring data was archived and classified. Dr. Petrov was reassigned to conventional materials research. Most of the team dispersed to other projects. The filamentary networks remained in the concrete, unmonitored and undisturbed, continuing whatever processes they had been engaged in all along. But some data survived. In 1996, after the Soviet collapse, a portion of the Splinter project archives was declassified and transferred to civilian research institutes. A materials scientist reviewing the files noticed something in the final monitoring data from 1982. In the last weeks before the splinters were removed, the vibration patterns had shown another evolution. The 317 timing had drifted significantly. In some buildings, it was occurring at 2:30. In others, at 4:15. The uniformity that had characterized the phenomenon for years was breaking down. The networks were diverging. A researcher who examined this data in 2003 wrote in an academic paper, "The Splinter project documented something unprecedented. A distributed network of quasi-biological structures embedded in human infrastructure, exhibiting collective behavior and apparent communication capabilities. The project's termination prevents us from knowing how this system developed after 1982. But given the rate of concrete construction worldwide since that time, the network must be vastly larger now than it was 40 years ago. Every building, every bridge, every structure we've constructed from concrete potentially contains these filamentary elements. What they're doing in there, what information they're processing and transmitting, remains completely unknown. Modern concrete construction has changed significantly since the 1970s. New formulations, different curing processes. But core samples analyzed from recent construction still show the filamentary networks. They're still there. Still forming during the curing process. Still embedded in the material that forms the skeleton of modern civilization. No one has recreated the Splinter device or attempted to monitor what the networks are doing now. Perhaps because no one wants to know. Or perhaps because someone already knows and has decided that particular knowledge should remain quiet. The concrete is still vibrating, at frequencies too low to hear, in patterns too subtle to feel. Carrying information we can't decode to recipients we can't identify. Doing whatever it is that networks embedded in stone do when no one is watching.